who's online, and Dr. Nat Hurley, who's our Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Newfoundlander, who's come home, and she's here with us tonight in person. And we also welcome everyone attending online who are watching us on the Alumni Engagement YouTube channel. I feel like whispering. Thank you for joining us, everybody. All right, Lisa.
Yes.
We're going to start out with a reading, I think.
Okay. Great. So this book is about love. I think it's about love. That's what I wanted to explore when I wrote it, because I could see that we were going through a pretty rough time, I think. And I always ask myself a question when I write a book, and the question was, what is love? And it came to be about family in a big way, and what is family, and different kinds of families, and that we have to make our families. So the section I'm going to read for you is kind of historical, and it's the only part in the book that's like this. So here it goes. It's about being a foster parent. Within a month after Bride Peach's husband's death, another death occurred in Hants Harbor, on the other side of the Heart's Content Barrens. A man lost his wife and was left with 5 children to rear up by himself. He called his sister to come over and take care of the youngsters, and he headed across the Barrens for Broad Cove. Bride's husband wasn't buried 2 weeks before the snow was staying on the ground. Then it was up around her knees. She wasn't pregnant, nor would she ever be. One night, there came a storm, the likes of which people said hadn't come through for 30 years. The winds were so high, the snow flicked past Bride's window in sheets, like someone thumbing all the pages of a book, trying to find the spot where they left off. There came a knock on the door, and this was Matthew Peach from Hants Harbor. He'd started out over the Barrens because he'd heard about a widow over in Broad Cove. And when the snow started, grainy and spiteful, he put his head down and kept coming. People have lost their way on the Barrens in the snow. You can hear voices, people around there say, when the wind is blowing hard. They are known as the lost souls of the Heart's Content Barrens. But there were bits of red rag tied to the shrubs along the path, and Matthew Peach followed them. Sometimes he was up to his waist, but sometimes the Barrens were swept bare, right down to the surface of the rock. He showed up in Broad Cove after dark and banged on Bride's front door. She turned 17 in the 8 months of marriage and got through the death and the burial in the big house with the wind howling all around it and the snow pinging against the window, falling asleep sometimes next to the coffin, her chin dropping, sitting up straight as a board. When her head became too heavy, it dropped and she jerked awake, and the walls of the room would present themselves in the moonlight, the furniture taking shape, the embers in the wood stove breathing, bright and dark. She'd grown up with 14 brothers and sisters, and all of them in one room, and never enough food. After the death of Samuel Malloy, everyone thought Bride would go back to see her family. But there were the animals, and she had to get the wood in, and she felt sluggish, an unfamiliar, slow-wittedness that she saw as a side effect of spending time with the dead. She felt a leaching of herself out through her left arm that went numb, sitting up next to the coffin. It was the side of her that didn't face the wood stove. Her arm and her thigh were pins and needles, and she'd have to rub them vigorously to get the feeling back in them. She knew this was her dead husband clinging to her. It was not so much that he wanted her to go with him, but that he wanted to stay beside her. After a time, his grip had grown weaker, and then he'd been buried. She'd shut the 3 doors on the upstairs bedrooms and slept in the bed where they had slept together, allowing the dog up with her, which was something she knew Samuel Malloy would not condone. She'd felt his consternation even from over the road, where he was in the grave with the headstone already iced over and gone under the drifts. During the storm, when the evening had set in, the dog started barking at the front door and there was the knock. Bride went to the window, but the snow was coming so fast the footprints up the lane had already disappeared. She opened the storm door and the candle she had was blown out, but it had lit up the cheek and eye of the man standing there, the snow in the brim of his hat all over his face. She blinked into the dark where he was a floating shape in the orange afterglow on her eyelids. When she opened her eyes, she felt the pang of her pupils dilating, and she could see him. He took off his cap, was standing there on the front step. He told her who he was and said he'd heard she was a good woman who'd lost her husband. The door was torn out of her hand and banged on the clapboard, and she looked down the road over his shoulder and saw the lamps come on in every window, one at a time, and then two or three at the same time, everybody just watching out for her, even though she was new there, just the 8 months. But they were seeing to her. He was after losing his wife, he said, and she gone and him with the 5 children. Did Bride think they could get married so she could raise up the children for him?
Winning Newfoundland writer Lisa Moore, a Memorial Creative Writing Associate Professor. And I just want to talk about your backlist. We have a slide of your backlist. Lisa, of course, is the acclaimed author of the novels Caught, February, Alligator, the story collections Open, and Something for Everyone, and the young adult novel Flannery. Her books have won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the CBC's Canada Reads, been finalist for the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize and the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and been long-listed for the Man Booker Prize. And Lisa is also co-librettist, along with Laura Kaminsky of the opera February, based on her novel of the same name, and that's going to come out in 2023. We're very excited to see that. And Lisa, of course, lives here in St. John's and in Broadcove, where the man with the candle on his cheek appeared. And along...
He was fiction.
Oh, he was fiction, but she was not. This is the problem with this book. Okay. Along with our discussion, we have Heidi Wicks, who's written for CBC and the Newfoundland Quarterly, and Riddle Fence and the Globe and Mail, Breakwater Books Creative Nonfiction Anthology Best Kind, and a fiction anthology Hard Ticket. Her debut novel, Melt, published by Breakwater, made the Globe and Mail's Best Summer Reading List in 2020 and received an IPPY Award, Silver Medal, or IPPY Award, Silver Medal, in the regional fiction category. She recently received Arts&L funding to complete a short story collection titled Here. Heidi received her BA in English in 2002 and a Master of Arts in Creative Writing in 2019. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Bridget Canning's debut novel, The Greatest Hits of Wanda Janes, was selected as a finalist for the 2017 Winterset Award, the Margaret and John Savage Book Award, and the NL Fiction Award, and was longlisted for the Dublin Impact Award, and it's currently being adapted to film. And her second novel, Some People's Children, was a finalist for the Winterset Award, the Thomas Riddell Award, and her third book and her first short story collection, No One Knows About Us, has literally just arrived on the doorstep from Breakwater Books as well. And Bridget holds a Master's of Arts in Creative Writing from Memorial and a Master's of Literacy Education from Mount St. Vincent, and received the CBC Emerging Artist Award with Arts&L in 2019. She grew up in Highlands, Newfoundland, and currently lives here in St. John's. Thank you for joining us. So funny, we went around the room before we started, and a lot of people are students of Lisa's, and some said former students, and I thought, are you ever really a former student of Lisa's? She's had a huge impact on a lot of writers here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so I'm going to give you guys the chance at the first crack at the first questions. Okay, so we'll start with you, Heidi. Okay.
Thinking about the past, what you're reading, a lot of, or all of the characters, there's a strong attachment to the past and what came before them and what their families went through. And which all affects, I guess, how they are able to love other people. So it kind of made me think about traumas that people may have gone through and how that affects how we love other people. And so I'm just curious if you did much research. Is that something you thought about a lot when you were writing it? Did you research it, or were you just kind of thinking about people's past experiences? Or
I fell in love with the book The Gathering by Anne Enright, which won the Booker, Irish writer, fantastic writer. And that book is about trauma. And Deneen Farquharson, who teaches in the English department, gave me a fantastic essay about trauma and how it, it was a long essay, and how it, what it does with memory, and how we can go backwards and forwards in time with when we have trauma. Things are out of order sometimes, or we remember them in different orders than, I guess we probably always remember in different ways, but I think the way time works in that novel, and how time works in plot in a novel, how it works with the characters, but also just how it works with the structuring of the novel, had a real impact on me. Like, I was very curious to see how it was working and how the trauma was worked through by the movement of scenes in out of chronological order.
Stop.
Using time like that, the structure of this novel seemed a little bit different.
In what way?
In that way, in the way that the time frames shift.
Well, I think there's a lot of characters in this book whose time frames are shifting. But in February, for instance, it goes backwards and forwards in time. And that's a novel about the sinking of the Ocean Ranger. And an interesting thing that happened to me recently with the opera, we were doing a workshop with singers, and I got to be the co-librettist on this opera, and I didn't know anything about opera, like zero, but I got a phone call, would you like to be a co-librettist? And I was Googling while and I said, yes, oh yes, I'll do that. So there was these powerful singers, and just recognizing like how ephemeral the human voice is and how strong, but also fragile and momentary when you look at the history of people. And in the novel, like different scenes from different times are just cheek by jowl. But on stage, so Cal, for instance, dies on the Ocean Ranger. And there's a scene of him dying on the Ocean Ranger in the novel. And then he's in the bedroom with his wife from back when they first got together. Well, for me, that was a narrative thing that you can do in a novel. A novel allows you to do that. But when Cal walked onto stage and started singing, I realized he's a ghost. And it was chilling to me because I had written a ghost story and I didn't know it. But having the presence and particularly the voice made me realize that time works in different ways in different media. And that was a real eye opener.
Question, Bridget?
In that line about like thinking about timelines and putting. Well, I'm going to start with the question I'm going to start with my question about beginnings. So the novel begins with this. I mean, the moment I'm not spoiling, of course, because we've all read it. Jules and Joe are on vacation, and Snowmageddon is going on at home. They're in Mexico. Meanwhile, home in Newfoundland, the snowstorm is in full effect, or has it's just began?
It's about to
It's about to hit. and they find out about Xavier has been attacked and been stabbed and is in the hospital in critical condition. And that moment at the beginning is so searing. And I remember reading it thinking like, God, it's almost a short story in itself, this moment. It could be like a postcard story or something. And I was thinking about how, and then from that, of course, the rest of the book, it kind of colors everything in this intensity as we're going through, especially Jules' point of view. And she's thinking about her family, and she's thinking about all these people she loves and why she loves them and how they love each other. And I was thinking, so I wanted to ask you, when it comes to beginnings like that, at what moment, because I imagine you knew that you wanted to write something that was going to take place during the snowstorm. At what moment did you compose that, like think of that scene? Do you start with the beginning, or does the beginning come to you as you're moving along?
I had to make a decision about writing about violence, and I was afraid to write about violence. I didn't want to sensationalize it. I didn't want to exploit the kind of sensation that occurs when you read something about violence. But at this point in my life and in my writing life, I realized I cannot avoid it. Like, we're living in a world, especially a certain part of downtown St. John's, where violence is really in my face all the time, like really a lot. And it is part of being human, and I needed to explore it, but I didn't want to put it at the beginning of the novel. And so I had always written it later in the novel, but it is, my editor said, no, that scene has to go at the beginning of the novel. Well, first, the parents of this young boy are in Mexico, and they get a call that their son has been beaten up and stabbed, and is in critical condition. And the editor said it has to go in the beginning because it is what the entire novel grows out from. And I guess it's an interesting relationship with an editor. I have an editor who is unfailingly Melanie Little. She's a beautiful, beautiful person, but also just an uncannily talented editor. So when she tells me to do something, I do it. But I think of Mary Pratt and the painter Mary Pratt, and I remember her saying that when she knew what she wanted to paint, she got this feeling in her gut. She knew, she might not know why, and this was an important image to paint, but she knew it was. Like, it was a physical sensation that she described almost as erotic. And that is something that happened to me and probably everybody during Snowmageddon. Like, one realized we are in the presence of something that is overwhelming, sublime, terrifying, and also, such a weird, strange beauty. Excuse me. So there was no question of not writing about it. Oh, this is my water here. I'm good. Question about not writing. I had to write about it.
To build on Bridget's question, though, were you concerned? Yes, you mentioned an area of St. John's or downtown St. John's, but that's not your world, really. That sort of violent,
Right.
drug-fueled world. How did you tap into that without sensationalizing it?
Well, I mean, it is kind of my world. Like, I've lived in that area for 20 years, and just this morning, one of my dogs escaped at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the dog, normally lives in the bay, and I ran out onto the street at 6 o'clock in the morning, yelling for the dog, and a guy showed up on a motorcycle and circled. So it's well, who knows? I mean, he was probably concerned about some mad woman screaming her head off, but yeah, it wasn't, I didn't feel safe. So there is that. But if you're talking about the economic disparity, um, yes, I have a very comfortable life. And the book is a lot about that. It's about people who are middle class or upper middle class who are incredibly comfortable, who have that kind of security. And then people who are living in incredible precarity. And of course, we're seeing that divide grow. Like just that it's a chasm now. And I'm aware, and this is, I think, probably the central thing about this book, that we all have a responsibility to each other, and the people we help are our family and the people who help us, and it's become urgent. It's become very urgent, and it was probably always urgent, but I think it's far more urgent now.
Story of the food bank at Mott. It's, one indication of that, right?
Yes. So if you're asking me, was I fearful about misrepresenting people who are suffering? Yes, I have to be very careful. But I felt I had to do it.
Ask you about your family members. I know this is fiction, but I do recognize certain characters as being very similar to some of your family members. Even some of the stories that they tell. Not all the characters are so closely aligned, but were you worried about mythologizing, like your mother, for example? How did she react to being mythologized in this book?
Well, I don't know what you mean by mythologize. That's my mother.
She
No,
is, yeah.
it's a
She's
real
mythical.
thing. My mother dies in the book. I probably shouldn't say that, but yeah. So I had to tell her, Mom, you die, and so she read the book, and she was annoyed at first, but then I got this phone call. It was a message, a voice message, and it said, "Hello, I died." This is as she was reading through. So I called her back immediately, and I said, "Mom, are you okay? And is everything okay?" And she said, "Oh yes, you and your sister grieved appropriately." In the book.
Son, also, you had to kind of clear things with him.
Well, he's never going to read the book. Okay. He made that clear. In fact, he doesn't read any of my books for reasons probably something like this. But so I did have to go through the, what happens to the son in the book. The son is really not my son. But as I said to him, you are my only son. So people may make the mistake of thinking this is you. And he said, okay. And I said, so I'm going to tell you everything that happens to the son in the book, just so that you know. He said, okay. And I said, well, okay. So in the beginning, you are beaten up by a mob instead. I mean, not you. And he's like, oh God, okay, what next? Well, you didn't die like your grandmother.
I think that closeness to your family story and your friends infuses this book with so much love.
Yeah, my mother-in-law died, and she was a big character in my life, a big person in my life. I loved her. She gave up work as a very powerful real estate agent to take care of my daughter so that I could write. And nobody had ever heard of, or I mean, I had never heard of anybody, getting someone to take care of your child so you could write for free. It seemed, it was a very she was generous and supportive. And when she died, I realized she was a great storyteller too. and I wanted to put it down in the book. I wanted to have it written down. I wanted, and of course there are things made up, but it was important to me that I wanted to document. There's a desire to document in this book, I think. Things that are passing and people that are passing.
But one that I keep rethinking about. So you've written lots of books. You're an artist yourself. You paint. This is your painting on the cover. You now opera as well. What can't you do? So, and then you were talking about Mary Pratt and how it comes from a certain place. So I'm just curious, like what, when you're working in different mediums, what is the same and what is different?
Well, I mean, there's a tremendous excitement. I mean, you know this, and everybody in this room knows this, of writing or just getting something down, like just trying to figure out what a thing is and capturing it, even though, of course, everything that you try to capture is elusive and you can only ever fail. But the trying is so exciting. And that, I think, is the case, whether it's painting or whether it's writing a libretto, co-writing, or, you know, a novel. I think, or, you know, the little bit of scholarly writing I've done has that same thrill. How is it different? I also really depend on my subconscious with all these things. And so, for instance, painting, a watercolor painting, I like to see where the spill of paint goes. Like I like to follow the paint instead of trying to control it. And it's the same with a story and the same with doing the laundry.
Where the Chavex goes?
Yeah. But what's different is that I really love narrative, and it's linear, and I love the feeling of writing things that appear to be chaotic and imposing a unity. Like I think unity is a big part of beauty, and trying to create something that's beautiful through line, like the sentence, the paragraph, you know, one word after the other. I just, that thrills me.
Previous conversation that we had, and you were comparing, you know, writing to painting and the paint spilling, and you know, you think the painting is about the river over there, but it's really about the pink leaves coming, the light coming through the trees, and how you've experienced similar things in writing, which I just find awesome, because you think something is going to feel a certain way and it ends up feeling a different way, or maybe the order of something is changed or the structure changes because your editor says so. So it's just, I don't know, the process is.
Yeah, and when things move around like that, even a paragraph, the meaning changes. And what comes out, presumably, is like I believe the subconscious moves things around because what you really want to say might be too difficult to say. And so it slides in there by accident, apparently by accident, simply by moving a paragraph, and then everything means something new.
I read and reread the fight scene or the stabbing scene several times because I just couldn't believe that you could capture the chaos of that and unify it like you did.
I certainly haven't reread it. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard.
So I'm going to go to Bridget next, but then I'm going to go to the audience, the live studio audience. I shouldn't. So prepare yourselves.
The questions I feel like we said something, someone said something before about how we're all kind of former students of yours. And so all my questions like, how do you do this? So it's just interesting because you just then when you were talking about the line of paint moving and this, you know, as this kind of flowing alive thing. But then I was kind of trying to, my question was, I guess both for just for I'll focus on the characters, because one of the things that struck out to me as I was rereading the book is, of course, that the chapter of what happens to Trinity on the raft, and which is so terrifying. You break your heart. You're your heart is broken for this child. Um, uh, this is when Trinity, her family's on the beach, and she's there with her mother and her mother's boyfriend, and they pretty much just let her. She's lying down on a raft, and yes, air mattress. Pardon me. Yes, and she falls asleep and she wakes up and she's about what, a kilometer, half a kilometer out into the water. She's almost at Belle Island, basically, and she gets rescued by the Coast Guard. And this is basically the moment that ends up with her being moved into foster care. And the chapter with the swan, which is from Jules' point of view, and I was just description, and Jules mentions, oh, and Trinity didn't want, when she didn't really like, she wouldn't go in the pool. She was nervous about the water, and it just, oh, I was like, oh my God, like I just broke my heart. So I guess what I was thinking of when you are writing the characters, because of course the timeline shifts around. There's stories that appear and kind of fold into each other, and the characters do that as well. When you're putting this together, do you stay in one character and think of that person's story, and then the moments when they intersect? Like, do you write? Did you write like Jules? Did you write Xavier?
No.
Okay.
For sure not. I moved in and out fluidly from all the different points of view. Well, I mean, I hope it's fluidly. But it felt fluid to me. They weren't really decisions because I was deep in the fictive dream, as people call it, writing and imagining. But yeah, later in the editing, all of that was reshaped. But this is a good time to say that I am on the stage with these three incredible writers. And these guys, well, yes, and Angela, you've been in my class as well. And they just came fully formed, really. um, no, it's true. It's true. But like you guys, the books that these people have written are, well, they're feminist, they're witty, they're full of humor, they're lush, they're vivid. I think I should say, really, we should be talking about your books. I mean, I'm now, guys, come on. No, it's absolutely not. It's there is, I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of talent for storytelling. Rebecca Rose is nodding. I mean, it's astonishing to me, the amount of talent for writing in this province.
Lisa's tapping into it in a really unique way and bringing a lot of people through the system. I never would have thought I could have written fiction until I sat in your class. And reading the first thing I wrote in her class, I think there might have been 8 students, it wasn't a big class. I've never been so terrified in all my life. I do live radio, live TV, but reading that story that I wrote.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Those classes are exciting. People are
Get past that part.
well, no, I think it's that part that's exciting. Like people are putting their guts on the page, their souls, and they have to share them. And like people, I mean, if Rob Finley was here, who also teaches creative writing, he would say this too. Like people end up crying in the class, like the whole class, or or laughing, killing themselves laughing. I mean, there have been such beautiful moments in the creative writing classes. It's a tremendous honor to get to be in the room when it's going on.
And they're always like a warm kind of environment, I've found. I've been in many of your classes. Always a support. Everybody's terrified at the same time. But there's, we're all there to puke our hearts on the page. So it's a very nice room to be in always.
So do we have an audience? And there's a way, if you're online, to ask a question as well. So if you go into the chat, you can ask a question on YouTube, or however you're watching on Zoom or on YouTube. And we have a system, a very sophisticated system set up to take that question and answer it. So yes, go ahead.
About how my relationship to that. Thinking through, well, I go in and out of affection. And then happens, and then even going in and out of relationships with adults. Is there what was your experience writing this novel? Is there a how we love? Did you?
Can you repeat
I
the
did.
question? Can you repeat the question a little
Okay,
bit?
yeah,
as
sure.
well as you can?
So Shannon was asking, saying that as she got older, a little bit older, not very old though, her experience of love has changed, and it does for all of us, I think. And the more experience we have with it, the more it changes, and how we love our parents and how we love our children and our friends, our lovers, all those things change over time. And I always think I know the answer when I start a book. I always think I know everything about it. And I think, oh, that's why I start, because I figure, okay, I'm all right here. But I think what I learned was I began by thinking that, like, when I was younger, I thought that love was about desire, and it was about sex, and it was about, like kind of uncontrollable thrills and a willingness to give over to passion and that kind of thing. And I still think love is somewhat about those things. But as I got older, I began to think, or at least in writing the book, it made me very old writing this book. I thought it's about responsibility. It's really about responsibility to others, yeah. And that maybe we should stop thinking about, we should open the circle of who we love. The book is really about that too. It's easy to like the people that are like us. It's a harder to like people who are different than us, and love them too. But I'm feeling deeply the responsibility to open myself to others. And I fail at this all the time, every day. But I think that's what love, how it shifted for me over the course of writing the novel. Like, who will we stand up for? And what will make us stand up, and how important it is. Yeah, and that's just the beginning of the question. Thank you.
Great question.
Have we got any other questions from the audience? Oh, Joel Deshay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, fascinating conversation. Thank you for the book. Great to hear this. I'd like to follow up a little bit.
We want you to take a microphone.
Narrative teach people about how to love, maybe love responsibly, or feel responsible for other people in a sense of care and things like that.
Yeah, I've just come from touring across Canada and got to hear amazing, amazing conversations by authors from all across the country. And on one panel, the question of does art have to be political came up. And Rawi Haj, who came from Lebanon, he said it doesn't have to be political. It must be a space where freedom happens. The author must just be free. But Omar El Akkad said, it absolutely, there's no choice. It is always political. And then the people in between had very strong opinions on both sides of that. And I recognize Rawi's position that freedom is political, having a freedom. That is the politics. This is not answering your question exactly, Joel, but I will say that I think every piece of fiction has to have conflict. And conflict, I'm beginning to realize, is about society pressing down on a character and shaping that character. And all of those pressures, whether it's inflation or, you've lost your bus pass, or you can't feed your child, or you can't get a spot at the daycare, all of that is pressing down and shaping the character. But also the character is an agent who is pushing back. And I think that pushing back is a kind of love. And also, so I don't know that I'm in a position to teach anybody anything, except creative writing, I should say, because I got a job. So a little bit of, I'll pretend I'm in a position, but so I mean, it'd be great if people, if people read it and at least thought love was a good idea. I think that's my hope. Thank you for the question.
First of all, I want to no. Private, a bit reserved, a bit shy. Then you pick up a book written by Lisa Moore and you say, oh my Christ, this is raw. This is exposed. And I'm wondering, but I'm wondering then how you feel giving that much of yourself to your audience, or do you feel you give that much to yourself, excuse me?
Oh, that's a really good question. And thank you. I think what it is it's so much work writing a novel that I feel like I absolutely have to try and make it true. And whatever that means, like I really have to put everything I have into that book, everything I am into that book, or else it's a waste of time. And, this book took a very long time to write. And so I don't want all that time to be wasted. So I really do. Yes, it is. And it is terrifying. Yeah, it's frightening for everybody, right? Like it's because you cannot write a book without putting yourself on the line. Yeah. So thank you.
Type it into the chat.
I'm so delighted to be here. I love this image that you think you're doing one thing and then it spills in another direction. I love this. So I guess my question is, if you think the book is This Is How We Love, what's to the side of love? What spills to the side? How would you describe the spill of this book? If it's not love, what's adjacent to it?
Well, the book is still quite new for me. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous because it did take me like 10 years from the beginning of thinking about it. But you don't really know what a book is until it meets a reader, and it changes within a reader. So it's not mine anymore. It's out there, and I think I need to wait and see what it will be. I have had, like, when I was on tour, people who had read the book talk to me about it, and to be honest, I felt that this book was incredibly dark, and I was very afraid of the darkness in the book. But people said it was the opposite, and I can't understand it. I can't understand it, but that, I think, is the spill. Thank you for that question.
Another question? I know I've got several by you here in the document.
Oh gosh. This kind of comes from that, like, the kind of idea of, actually, it's kind of just as what you were saying, like that the book, you feel the book is very dark, but I found reading it, like, even there's just, it's such a, there's so much beauty in it. There's so many beautiful moments and beautiful descriptions, especially actually at points where it's quite dark. And I guess one of the things I was thinking about, I was having a conversation with George Murray a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about, I'll be reading someone's tweet about something terrible that happened to them, and this little dark voice was like, "What if this terrible thing also?" Like, and in a way, that's when I was reading your book, I was thinking it feels like there was that kind of, we had Snowmageddon, and we had this situation like, what if it was worse? I think is sometimes a very dark question, but I also think it's a question that's very important as a writer for empathy. So we think about, like, this is terrible. What if I was this? What if I was in this situation? How much worse could it be? And we dive into that. So I guess I wanted to ask that. Did you feel that was how maybe you began the process of this book, asking those types of questions?
Yes, I felt like it was already it was worse. I felt like we had reached worse. But I do say in my classes, if you're like, you have to put your characters in as much peril as their particular situation could sustain. So for instance, if you have a little old lady who has, had a perfect life and has a cup of tea, this beautiful teacup that's been in her life her whole life, and she smashes the teacup by accident, that might be the worst peril that little old lady could have in that story. And it would be your job as the writer to break the reader's heart as the cup breaks. But given the moment that we're in, I was able to imagine darker things, or I felt I had a responsibility to follow them.
I think we do have an online question. Our very sophisticated online question system is now going to ramp up.
We do have a question from Chad Pelly, who's watching online. Chad says, I am always struck by how visceral and vivid your scenes are and how well you put the reader in the scene and make them feel it. So I'm wondering, what scene from this book has stayed with you?
You know, it's a funny thing, but there's a scene that I wrote that do you mean does he mean thank you, Chad, first of all. I love Chad. um, so there is a scene, and it's a small scene. One of my editors, wanted to cut many things. They were like, "What is that doing?" And I definitely didn't want to cut stuff. But anyway, there was this scene where Jules is in the car with her mother, and there is a suit hanging that's come from the dry cleaners, and it's hanging, on the hook in the back seat. And so it's got the plastic over it, and a button is like got rhinestones, and there's a sunset, and a transport truck goes by and blocks the sun, and then it's gone, and the button just jiggles to life in this fire as the mother, who has gone outside and is walking around to the driver. It sounds insane even when I try to explain it, but like walks around and gets in the car, and they go. Like, shouldn't be in the novel. It does nothing to forward the plot. It doesn't even do anything for character. But of course it happened to me. Like, I thought, I saw that button catch fire and realized, like, it gave me shivers. And I have had 3 people come up to me while I'm on the road going, in the lineup to get their book signed, saying, "That scene with the button." I'm like, right? It's like a page. It's insane that they let me leave it in. But anyway, I know.
We have another online question.
Yes, we do. And Jennifer Locash is agreeing with you. She says that is the most brilliant moment.
Jennifer?
Here's a question from Lisa Brown. She's asking, is there anything in the book that you would change now that it has left you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, thank you for that question. No, it's sort of like your children. Like, you just have to accept your children, whatever way they are. I do believe that the book is the way it is because there are reasons that I may not know. And yeah, it's just the way it is. So there's nothing I would cut now, especially not the button.
You about notes, taking notes. You always have a notebook. You're always scribbling things down. I don't know how you reread them because you're just like, and I know that you have done that for years and years. And I'm not sure that you actually go back to those, but that's where you write those little button scenes down,
Yeah.
right? How, you said it took you 10 years to write the book. Like, are you writing in one notebook for this book so that you have all these beautiful visuals? No.
So a funny thing happens. Like, I will write a scene like that down. It'll be in a diary. And I don't go back and read the diaries usually, but it'll be like in a diary from 10 years ago. And then I write it in a new diary 10 years later. And if I happen upon that thing, it's almost exactly the same words. Isn't that weird? That's kind of frightening, really. So I think what I do is, like, over the years, I rewrite. It stays with me. Whatever the image is stays with me almost in the way I first experienced it.
But you're doing a million things. You're writing operas, you're teaching classes. I know you barely have time to walk the dog, but you managed to collect these jewels and, write this, like, where do you do, when do you do it?
I do it at 5 o'clock in the morning. I do it at 5 o'clock in the morning, and because it's quiet, because it's pitch black, and you can't really go anywhere. And I guess I'm still soft from sleep in my brain, and that time is so precious to me. I just love that time. And since having children, that was the only time I really had completely to myself till about 5:30. No. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a beautiful time. I highly recommend it.
Heidi, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. It took you 10 years to write this book. Like, there must be times when you just hate writing, is there? And I mean, maybe not, but what do you do if you, are you ever stuck and just not feel like just feeling kind of jammed up? And if you do, what do you do to get out of that?
Well, when I say it took 10 years, I mean I was working on like, but I wrote other books in the interim. What do you do when you're stuck? What do I do when I just move to another scene? I feel like if you're stuck, there's a reason for that too. And to just go into another character's head or yeah, drop it and move on to the next thing. And it will rear its head up again.
Kind of trust the place in your being, that it lives there, that you wrote a scene in a diary 10 years ago, and then it's going to come up in 10 years. It's just, it's there somewhere.
I mean,
It'll emerge when it needs to.
I threw many of these diaries out. I went to the dump in a car, and all of the diaries were like, because there was just too many of them, and they were taking up space and getting dusty, and they were crowding in on me. And so, and there was a survey going on at the dump, and so we got, so there was a traffic jam at the dump, and I was running out of gas. So I had to, you know, I was taking like the diary that's under the accelerator. I'll look at that, you know, and that was 1982. And then the one over here was like 2021. And anyway,
Shiny buttons went to the dump.
I know. I sort of, speaking of regret, I kind of regret that. That was a bad Maria Kondo moment. I knew there was something I didn't trust about that philosophy. And it's like, she says, get rid of your books. Like, come on.
I was a bit traumatized. So I was like, you mean somewhere in the dump there's like a hatchback full worth like size pile of Lisa Moore's diaries? Oh my God.
Some archaeologist will dig that up.
I don't.
What's with the buttons? Any other questions from our live studio audience? It's been great to have real people here listening to us.
I do want to say one thing, that what you've done for me, and I've known you for a long time. I was a kid that didn't read. I was learning disabled and couldn't help. And it's funny how listening to you over the years and what you've done for me, you opened my imagination in your writing. And I love it. I love how it takes me through. It captivates me, it brings me in. And that's something that's very skilled, because for me, reading a book was the beginning, talking to someone to tell me, fill me in, and the ending usually, or my mother or someone reading it to me, and I'm not joking. But I've since, and something else that you've given me was that it didn't really matter, and it'll come time. Just let it go. And when I picked up that book, and Anne and I were discussing it driving in, you know, who was who, but you take people's imaginations and you set them free.
Wow. Thank you, Sue. Thank you. Well, I have lots of things that I treasure about you as well, and not least that you are such a powerful social activist and keeping this province on its toes.
So I think we're, what? I know, we're just getting warmed up. We can move to a bar. So part of each Coastlines event includes time to share the local love, where the author who's on the spot tells us their favorite local literature. Now, given that Lisa is a teacher and has taught most of the writers in Newfoundland, I guess it's difficult for you to name favorites, but we do know that you're a fan of Bridget and Heidi, and we have their books here, and we want you to talk about them a little bit.
Okay.
They're not there yet, but they will be there.
Well, Heidi's Melt is, oh gosh, it's just hilarious. It's moves back and forward in time. The two time periods are
Late 90s and
Pod Moratorium and
20 teens.
yeah, and it's sexy and it's heartbreaking and it's about families. It's about breakups, but mostly it's about friendships between women. And it's just stunning and it's so lush and so gorgeous and so yeah, it's a beautiful book. And Bridget Some People's Children is it is harrowing and it is so completely honest. I mean, these two writers are, like I said, you know, you don't bother to write a book that's mild because it's a waste of time. These books are not mild, like they're looking squarely in the face of things like misogyny and betrayal and but also love and failure. Like you know, Toni Morrison did not write perfect characters. She wrote flawed characters, and she was so good at that because they were so profoundly human. And these guys are doing the same thing. These characters are, yeah, just alive. And both of them write short stories as well, and that is a whole other skill that they both have. Beautiful. So in Hard Ticket, the anthology that Rebecca Rose kindly published, even though I kept phoning her up and saying, "Oh my God, we got to have another story in it now." No, it's out.
It's out.
That's out. It's so beautiful. It has such great stories in it, and both Heidi and Bridget are in it, and yeah, so they're also, yeah, can write a mean short story as well.
And Bridget has a brand new book out.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it.
It's called No One Knows About Us, and it is the characters throughout the stories are all kind of playing with the idea of being good or bad, and there's there's a lot about kind of relationships and connections that are kind of just below the surface. There's a lot of, you know, for example, there's a character who has had their entire stomach removed and believes they don't feel fear the same way anymore. So they start thinking they're a vigilante and going out and doing acts of vigilantism. So, so yeah, I had fun with a lot of the stories.
Well, congratulations. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. As is our Coastlines tradition, we announce who our next writer is going to be, and we're going to have Rick Mercer talking to Canadians, his memoir. So we'll hear from one of the most private public figures who turns the spotlight on himself. It was an instant #1 bestseller and bound to generate lots of book club discussions. And as well, our next Coastlines, besides our next Coastlines, Coastlines will be back here on Signal Hill, we hope, on January 21st for an event partnership with the Sparks Literary Festival. So that's great news too. Yeah. And thank you all for being here on behalf of Coastlines and Memorial's Office of Alumni Engagement and the staff here at the Amira Center and everyone who came to be in our audience. Thank you and good night.